All the way from Bokota village in Limpopo, South Africa, we bring you Missionary Minds, where you can learn about family, church history, biblical worldview issues, and of course, missions, all from the mind of a real-world missionary of almost 20 years. And Buddy Paul, today we're diving a bit into church history for our Family Friday, and I'm just thinking of Wednesday morning it was when we take our morning walks, and this past Wednesday was our last one going through the book we'll be discussing today. And as the rain was pitter-pattering down and enjoying those walks, they've been very beneficial to me, and this book has as well. And so I'll let you tee it off us, introduce the book, and how our discussion is going to go today. Over to you, Mfundisi.
Yes, this book has been somewhat even more special, not just reading through it, but like you said, we've read through it together. We do a few chapters, 4 or 5 chapters per walk. And I would even encourage those who are listening, this would be a great kind of discipleship book to read through with one of your children, or even another parent, or another man in ministry. This book was published in 1897. I'm going to start with a trivia question for you here, because it's church history all the time in these parts of Bokota village. 1897 was published. Spurgeon died. I'm totally putting it on the spot right here.
No. This is too easy, because Spurgeon has been, for a while, when I first got into a little bit of church history, he was my favorite preacher, the Prince of Preachers himself. And so I actually took notes of his death year as 100 years before I was born. So you chose an easy question for me, 1892.
Wow, well done. It was kind of a trick question, because it was published 5 years posthumously.
Yes.
So this was not ghost written by someone else. It was just published afterwards. Yes, 1897, a brief book, under 200 pages, small if you get it in paperback. You can get it for free on PDF, broken into 20-some chapters. And as you know, Spurgeon is just so colorful in his writing. We require all of our teachers at Museba Classical School to read a number of books on either teaching or children, and this is one of the first ones we give them, Come Ye Children. It's quoted from Psalm 34, where the psalmist says, "Come ye children, and hearken to me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord." And so he just unpacks that verse and just writes, basically this is a series of random sermons put together on children. And I kind of came up with 5 reasons of why we require our teachers to read it. And so let me just kind of give the 5. One is that it's short. Like I mentioned, it's under 200 pages, and it's colorful. Spurgeon once said that he would wear a soldier's uniform while teaching. Can you just picture Spurgeon doing this? If that would draw a crowd. And he said, I'm not into gimmicks, but if that draws children, better to have lots of children than an empty chapel. So I thought that was great. That's kind of the way he talks. In no particular order, I'm just trying to remember these. It's biblical. So he not only pulls from well-known stories like Samuel and Timothy, and David, but he also pulls from Obadiah, pulls from the Shunammite's son. He just pulls from somewhat obscure stories that are really endearing to the soul. You know, it's good for me to think about Abijah. Like, when's the last time I thought about Abijah? And he just takes a little phrase and he unpacks it. So that's helpful. He's pro-child. He loves children. There should be more children in this house. And we live in an era where it's an era of death. It's abort the child, sterilize yourself, have children way late in life, maybe one. Whereas Spurgeon is continually putting the fresh breezes of children are a blessing to a society and to a church. He's quotable. Spurgeon, he's the type of guy that you can easily tweet out something, you can put it on your website. He has a pithy way of speaking. He's witty, he's colorful. And so for those reasons, I would really encourage people to pick up this little volume. It will help parents to think wisely. It's also a very practical book because he gives helps. This is just one that comes to mind. He says things like, and we talked about this for a little while when we were together, about what about a child who says, I love Christ, but he doesn't talk a lot about trusting Christ. And he says, let him talk that way. It's more agreeable to a child's mind to say, I love Jesus, rather than I'm placing my faith and trust in Jesus. Yes, he's placed his faith and trust in Jesus, but it's more agreeable to a child's mind to say love. So just kind of practical ways of how we can parent better, how we can teach better, how we can be Sunday school teachers better. So for all those reasons, pick up Spurgeon's Come Ye Children.
That's helpful, brother. So I was trying to write these down as you were saying them. And we love alliteration here at Missionary Minds. So it's brief, it's biblical, for the blessing of children that it
Come on,
paints.
Brother.
It's beautiful.
Oh, yes.
In how quotable it is. And I fell short on practical. I couldn't think of one quick enough.
Okay. Well done.
Yeah. And we have a couple of quotes today that we want to go through. So do you want to hop straight into those?
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Yeah. So can you explain how we're going to go about it?
Okay, so you just, we chose some of our favorite quotes. So why don't you start by giving me a quote, and then I'll kind of just very briefly unpack it a little bit. Then I'll throw a quote back to you.
Okay, so we have 10 quotes here. And the first one is, I had rather receive the title SST than MA, BA, or any other honor that ever was conferred by men.
Yeah, so SST there would be Sunday school teacher. And I love this. There's a lot of background to this because Spurgeon, though he was the most popular preacher in his day, probably top 5 most gifted pastor preacher ever, he was not formally trained. So he was not a doctor. He had no letters behind his name. And so there's more to that than just the quotation. He wanted his preachers to be gifted communicators, and he believed that a person who dedicated themselves to teach 3rd grade Sunday school class for the last 10 years, he said he'd rather have Sunday school teacher at the end of his name rather than some kind of doctorate, something like that. Okay, quote, to be a believer in God early in life is to be saved from 1,000 regrets.
That's one that really hits me in the heart because it's getting to the core of what my wife and I are trying to give to our child, our son, Obadiah. We want him to know the scriptures which are able to make him wise unto salvation so that he may be shielded and protected from all the evils of this world. I think of Paul who said, and what was the result? You are now ashamed of the things you used to do. What profit did you have in those things of which you're now ashamed? And there are many things which if a child is saved young, they will be kept from and protected from as they grow older.
Do you think you can use that quote to encourage someone who they are in a public group of people and they follow someone who was converted at 34 and came out of drugs and drunkenness, and they think, wow, my testimony's lame. I was converted at age 7 and I didn't come from any of that. I feel insecure and embarrassed that, wow, that's a major glory story. How do you answer someone like that?
I would say praise the Lord for lame testimonies. And just first of all, there are no lame testimonies. The regeneration of a dead heart is always a miraculous work, but just playing tongue in cheek with it. And then you look at when God was speaking to his people in Deuteronomy and he was laying down the law, he wasn't hoping that they would rebel. He wanted to keep them from rebelling within blessing. Anyone who's experienced that life will readily tell the person that, hey, it's not fun being a retiring drug addict versus battling porn. It's better to have never known those things than to have to wrestle with them as a believer.
And I surmise if you were to ask that 34-year-old drunk which testimony he'd rather have, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's an easy answer.
Grace looks loveliest in youth. Grace in a child has a convincing force. The infidel drops his weapon and admires.
Yes, this reminds me of a time on an airplane where a Muslim was sitting next to our family. We have all of our children on the plane, 16 hours across the ocean. We try to sit together, but sometimes a straggling child. So here's, I think it was Owen, like he's back here sitting next to this Muslim. And by the end of the trip, he's got an arms full of snacks because this guy was buying him all kinds of things because he was amazed. You know, children, they have no precautions in them. Like, I'm a Christian. Are you a Christian? Why aren't you a Christian? Oh, you follow Islam. You know, so there's no real guardrails. He's just going at it. And he was amazed by it. I think that's the idea Spurgeon is at. When you see a child who loves Christ, who's doing what's right, it causes even, let's say, the atheist to pause, drop his weapons, and say, it's amazing. All right, next quote. A boy is more worth saving than a man.
There are at least two reasons I can think of behind the value of this quote. The first one is that everyone who has their right mind within them knows that the life of a child is a precious life. And so if there's a burning building, you go and you save the children first. And so in that sense, you're looking at that child and you want to care for them, you want to preserve them, you want to keep them. And then the second reason, which I think holds a lot of weight as well, is that the child has their whole life ahead of them. They have more potential money in the bank with which to serve the Lord, the years left in their life. If a man gets a deathbed conversion, we praise the Lord for that, but he spent his whole life serving the world instead of serving the Lord, whereas the child has their whole life on their side. The next one. Do not flatter the child with delusive rubbish about his nature being good.
Yes. Children are not naturally good. Children are totally depraved. This is just a little explanation of T, of Tulip, the Doctrines of Grace, 5 Points of Calvinism. Totally depraved. The natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God. Our hearts are desperately wicked. Children need conversion. Don't tell them about how great they are. Tell them that they're sinners that need a Savior, Jesus Christ. All right, next quote. A famous schoolmaster was accustomed to take his hat off to his boys because he did not know whether one of them might not be prime minister.
This takes me back to when my wife and I were thinking of names for our child. We never knew it then if it was a boy or a girl. And one of the ones that I really enjoyed was Esther. I loved the name Esther. And my wife said, that sounds like an older woman's name. And I said to my wife, well, our daughter will grow up to be an older woman one day, and then she'll just have the right name. But it's just getting to the heart that this young child is going to become someone one day, and you don't know who they're going to become. And it speaks to the value that Christian teachers and Sunday school teachers and parents should have as they invest in the children, knowing that you don't know who they'll be for the kingdom or world changers tomorrow. The next one. You do not thoroughly know any truth till you can put it before a child so that he can see it.
And I've learned this again and again with my children. It's easy actually to fall back on big terminology. When people know the big terminology, you don't necessarily have to know what it means. You can say justification to a group of churched adults and not know what justification means, and they'll all nod their heads. But if you can't say justification to a child, they're going to say, what does justification mean? So you have to explain it. And even our church history series right now, and it's getting built up where it's got quotes, and it's the type of thing that you could teach to a church or even at a seminary level. It began with children. So it didn't have any quotes because you can't give quotes to children unless they're very short and witty and fun. But my goal was to unpack the life of a church history hero and tell as many of the fascinating, fun, adventurous stories as possible. So even now, when I'm telling these, I'm trying to pull out the best quotes, the most adventurous stories not putting as much doctrine in there. I think that's Spurgeon's point.
It makes me think of just a side analogy with the Tsonga language. And one of the young guys asked sometime recently, explain the Trinity to me. And you're there thinking, the Trinity is hard enough to explain in English.
Yes.
And now I have to use a language which
Yes.
has much less vocabulary.
Yes.
And it really stretches you. And so teaching children stretches
And I
one.
think we even did that when we've been going through the early patristics, and we were talking about the Trinity, and we made a point of the simplest is it's a triangle with a circle around it. It's like, but those things are important, right? Because
Yes.
we can understand these are the members that are God, but then the members themselves are not equal to each other. We're
Yes.
always looking for ways to simplify it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next quote. If you want big-souled, large-hearted men or women, look for them among those who are much engaged among the young, bearing their following, and sympathizing with their weaknesses for Jesus' sake.
When dealing with children and they're not getting it and they're being disobedient, and it's even when they're well-meaning, you try and teach a young boy how to use a drill or an electric screwdriver to drive in a screw, and then you turn away for a second and he's completely destroyed the screw because he pulled too hard. You're dealing with young people who don't have all their wits about them, and people who have to deal with children constantly, teachers of young children and parents. I think of my wife and the home with the children. They grow patient and they grow big-souled, as Spurgeon puts it. And this is not to even mention the joy and the simplicity of life that you see or you engage with as you interact with a child. The next one. The silver key of kindness will unlock their hearts.
So sometimes we complicated what it takes to reach a child. Sometimes it's just be really nice to them. Be kind to them. Pick them up. Pick up the little kids at the school. Like, the little kids at the school don't really care what I know, but they love it when I go over there and pick them up. And then as they get older, be kind to them. And that goes back to an earlier quote, which one of these children is going to bury you one day. One of these children might be prime minister. At least with your own children. Are you going to look back and say, I should have been more kind to my children? So just the importance of the silver key of kindness. We'll close with this one. If you teach him heresies, he will receive them. What you teach him now, he will never forget. That's got a danger, and that's got a pro and a con to it. Right?
Yes. Children are being molded by those who are around them. And my wife and I remarked recently, just following some stuff happening in America, and there are Koreans and Mexicans and different types of people, and they have pure American accents, such that if you never saw them face to face, you think you're speaking to a person from Texas, born and raised. And that's because of how they were taught, how they were poured into. And now it's so much a part of their identity. And this just has Solomon written all over it when he says, bring up a child in the way they should go. When they're old, they won't depart from it. And so parents and teachers should be aiming to make their children once again like Timothy, to be surrounded with the scriptures, so that the scriptures are what they will not depart from when they grow older. Any closing remarks, brother?
I would just encourage parents and Christians and teachers to pick up this little volume. It's a small paperback. You can get it for free on PDF, and I think it will really help you as you learn to love and educate children in the way the Bible teaches.
Yes, Come Ye Children by Spurgeon. What a treat, Mfundisi. To our audience, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to rate it and subscribe to keep posted with more upcoming content. Feel free to share this episode with someone who might find it interesting and submit any questions you may want answered in a future podcast. You can email those questions to paulschleyline@gmail.com. You can also visit betweentwocultures.com for other resources like this. I'm your host, Yamikani Katunga, and until next time, that's it from Missionary Minds.